everyone. I'm Katherine Kuchenbecker, and I am responsible for you for the next 2.5 hours. I'm going to try to make it interesting. I'm going to try to remember the things I said I wanted to say in my presentation. But please feel free throughout to interrupt me, to speak up. I want to make this very interactive so that it is useful to you and interesting to everyone who's joining. And so to begin, we're going to return to a topic that's come up so many times, but honestly I'd already planned to do this even before Gregory Reardon showed the match video on the first day, but I'm going to take a somewhat different take on it. I want you to think about lighting matches, and I want you to think about which senses help you. And maybe not, if you're not here, the touch sensing and processing summer school, what do you think most people on the street would guess? Which of your senses is most important for tasks like this? Sight, yeah, I totally agree. Vision is really helpful. And we have some computer vision researchers here in the room, and we use vision all the time to observe our environment. So, do you think I can light a match with my eyes closed?
Yes.
Well, let's try. Okay, so I gotta find my backpack, and I gotta open the zipper, reach inside. Ah, there are the matches. Oh yeah, there are my matches. And then I gotta light a match. It's actually pretty easy, right? Then let's watch again this very now famous. Oh, actually, I have a question for you. So yes, okay, and I've done this on stage many times. Actually, I did this on stage at ICRA at 40 in Rotterdam last year, and on stage with German Robotics Conference. This was probably the last time I'm ever going to do it. I've never burned myself or burned the building down. Now let's watch this really famous Johansson video, and I want you to watch carefully because I'm going to ask you to speculate a bit afterwards, right? So let's watch it again carefully. So she's had her thumb, index finger, and middle finger anesthetized. She's trying to search. Notice she did it differently. She's not using her other hand to hold the box, right? This is a bit artificial, so the box of matches is on the table, but she's really struggling to find the match, to maintain control of it. And I think it's going to be easy. But even that's so easy. Okay, good job, she did it. So we can do it slowly and clumsily, first shot, first time without a sense of touch. Now I want you to tell me why. Why do you think it was so hard for her? Or it would be, I assume, hard for all of us if we...
Because we are too used to use tactile feedback, tactile information.
I fully agree that we have this, our brains and our bodies, we're constantly anticipating the sensory consequences of our emotion, and to have that wiped away, taken away all of a sudden, it's very unnatural. So you're feeling this, and that tells you immediately something's wrong. Have you ever had a cavity or something at the dentist and they've anesthetized, they give you Novocaine, and it's hard to talk, and you can even bite through your tongue, right? You feel like it's not even your body anymore, right? Or if your leg falls asleep, your arm falls asleep. Okay, so one thing, we will write down her expectation was violated. What else? Or why? A little more specifically. What else? So it's different, it's new. Yeah, go ahead.
She's missing feedback.
Which feedback?
Like feedback about the position of the
okay, because I don't have sensors in the matchstick. Where is the sensation coming from? At the contact, right? So I think contact location, Ali, is definitely really important. What else?
The slipping.
Slipping, yes, we learned a lot from Stephen yesterday morning about slip and how important. Yeah, you saw it was actually, here, I'll play it one more time. You can't watch this video too many times. And yeah, so the slip was missing. So there were times when the matchstick here, things are slipping out of her fingers, she's not able to, there, like that, and she can't feel it. She's watching it, she has full vision, she's seeing everything that's happening. Okay, what else?
The force.
The forces. Yes, we learned, I think, from Stephen yesterday, though, that force comes also from our muscles. Who said it? I didn't see. Was it Jen or sorry, Luis? I was not looking. I just had a voice in the general neighborhood. I think you're right that the shear of the force, like the load force, especially in the end when she was trying to, so like contact force, is missing. Other things. Yeah.
Do you know if she lost her proprioception in the fingertips, or is it just the mechanoreceptors?
I actually don't know. Someone said they think they gave her an anesthetization of her nerve, but I'm guessing she can definitely still feel her shoulder, her elbow, her wrist. And we don't have like a position sensor in our fingertip. We construct our estimate of where our fingertips are from all of our joint angles and our knowledge of our body, and also what we see and what we feel. So I think a little bit probably. I
think, sorry to interrupt, I think SA2s are involved in
Stretch.
So stretching the
Exactly.
skin is partly involved in proprioception.
But it's like 10%, right? Or something like that? Okay. All right, proprioception. I'll explain what we just were talking about for those who haven't heard it yet. So everyone bend your elbow and like move your shoulder around. You should feel your skin and also your clothes are stretching. And that contributes a bit to your sense of the pose of your body. And there are some experiments where they stretch your skin and show that they can make you think you're bending your knee or bending your elbow just by stretching your skin, because I think the nervous system doesn't throw any information away. There's this flow of all these different sensations. I titled my talk I had the word multimodal in there. There's this stream of all these sensations, and kind of like machine learning, it doesn't throw anything away. Like if there's a pattern to be found or it's useful, it contributes to, and therefore you can get to do some illusions. So proprioception, I agree. I don't think like her elbow or shoulder are impaired by this finger anesthesia, but I do think some estimate of the stretching of her fingers, and she can't quite feel where her fingers are relative to another. Stephen?
Just because we're talking about proprioception and skin, just a story that I saw on Macefield, who's prepared in the slides yesterday. He had a great sort of small-scale experiment with these children who had this unusual genetic disorder where they had no proprioception. So I think they lost afferents in their muscle spindle or something.
Mm-hmm.
And when they tried to walk, they are really uncoordinated. And so what he did was he took some physiotherapy tape and he put it on the skin of their knees.
To exaggerate the skin stretch.
To pull on the skin. And then when they walk, then they just learn to use that information with skin stretch. So you kind of get them back some knee proprioception, which is really interesting.
I think other athletes do that. I used to play volleyball at Stanford when I was a student there, and I played with Carrie Walsh, who was an Olympic gold medal beach volleyball player later, and she had a lot of shoulder problems. And they used to put tape on her skin, not only to stabilize it, but like draw more attention, but I think it was also to give her better perception of where her shoulder was, because then you're coupling in more, you're at this adhesion. All right, there's one more thing I was hoping someone might say here that they haven't said. Jen?
Torque detection, that she cannot feel where the match is rotating, so she cannot adjust.
Say it again?
Torque detection.
Torque detection, yeah, sure. The sort of like rotational torque. I think, yeah, so that might be part of skin stretch, I think. So torque, like skin stretch. There's even one more that you still haven't said, and it's my favorite. It comes from my favorite mechanoreceptor. So if I take the match, and I'm like dragging it. Here, I'll do it on the end. Oh, sure, friction, sure. I think that's kind of like forces. I think that's kind of contact forces. Well, this is contact force. This is finger object. And I'm trying to get you to think of like contact forces. Think about to Greg's talk on Monday. Contact force. Yes, vibration. This is like object to world. And maybe this is not the most important, but yeah, the vibrations transmitted through the object. That was the one I was hoping. So when she's like feeling the hard contact, and that's you can feel vibrations up to 1,000 hertz. So it overlaps somewhat with the low frequencies you can hear, and then as you're dragging, you feel that texture, and you need to control that. You need to know it's actually moving, it's slipping. Whether you want controlled slip. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so thank you. That was a good answer, Ryan. We've already heard quite a bit about this week, but touch is really important for humans. We have these amazing mechanoreceptors that are providing this flood of sensory information. I love this paper. This is Johansson and Flanagan 2009 Nature Reviews Neuroscience. I definitely recommend you read it when you have some time. It tells us about the 4 different kinds of mechanoreceptors in the glaber skin, the non-hairy skin on our hands, and how we use them. It's particularly for picking up and setting down an object. And our intuition, if you're a computer scientist or an engineer, your intuition about what kind of touch signals are important, it's probably not the same as what the neuroscientists and physiologists have figured out through actual scientific study. So we should read these things, at least to not be blind to them. And other people have already shown this diagram, but I want to call your attention to three things. These things that are highlighted down in the bottom. It's focusing on the FA1 and SA1 contact responses and release responses. And I think is making and breaking contact with the skin. When my skin begins touching something and when it ends. We actually didn't even write that here. We wrote contact location, but I think the time of contact. If I'm reaching out into this box of matches, my fingers are occluding the matches, right? And I don't have a very good view in depth, but I can tell when there's a very salient spikes of a whole population of mechanoreceptors when contact starts. And that precise, it's hard to estimate when it's going to happen. And having that signal lets you move from reaching to loading. So you change your action. This is why I wrote that it's event-based. That we're in a mode of like reaching through free space and we need to know when to switch to force control. And we switch to force control to start grabbing my coffee cup when the contact happens. And I don't have perfect proprioception. You can probably try to bring your fingers together behind your head without vision. Okay, I touched it, I was off. You're much worse than you think you are. You can do it, but you're off by sometimes a centimeter or two. And once you feel it, then you can correct. But proprioception, we're not like a robot in terms of being as precise. So we're using vision to correct our precise and tactile signals and sounds. These are these event-based, these are transients that happen here on the surface of your skin, or when I'm trying to hand you something, when I'm trying to set it down. Those are really important. Also, and this was my favorite, these transient mechanical events. So once the object is already in my hand, and I can feel when it leaves the surface, or especially when it hits the surface again, that excites these FA2, these deep, I always think of them as like biomechanical accelerometers. We learned a lot from Gregory on Monday about how vibrations travel through our whole body, and so we don't have that many of these mechanoreceptors, but they're exquisitely sensitive, and they especially tell us when a tool we're holding. This is making and breaking contact between handheld objects and other objects. This is about contact between my skin and objects, and this is I'm holding something and it's making and breaking contact with stuff. So the same arguments that I made, I'm moving through free space, I'm holding my match, I want to bring it down and make contact. I need to know when contact started so that I can switch my kind of control that I'm doing. So those two kinds of events are really important. And then the third theme that I think is often forgotten is that motion and touch are really intertwined. And I think maybe too often we think about touch like vision, especially when we're doing vision-based tactile sensors, or we are just getting this data that's streaming in, we're trying to make sense of the patterns. But motion is so fundamentally intertwined with touch, and you need to know the context of the movement you're making to make sense of what you're feeling. And this is symbolized here by anticipating these are motor commands. Your brain gets a copy. It's called corollary discharge. So when you're telling your body to do something, there's like a feedback. That command comes back, and it's kind of going through, you can think of it like a simulation of your body and the world, and then you're comparing. That's what this little comparisons, you're comparing what you imagine. It says projected tactile subgoal events. You're imagining you'll feel something. You don't know exactly when the contact will happen. You don't know exactly when you'll bump into something, and you're comparing that with what you do feel. They don't show it here, but you also might hit something unexpected, and that would mismatch. You're not expecting to feel anything. You're walking through and something bumps you, or you hit your elbow on something. You didn't expect it. That's also really important. You need to pay attention. So those are three themes that I think are really important that we as engineers and computer scientists can learn about touch from the neuroscientists, and then I try to take through my research, almost as like keys you can use to open different doors, or like check my assumptions, like, hey, are these things we should pay more attention to than we might normally be doing? And yeah, so I believe that robotic systems still often ignore these facets of touch. And I work on two sides. Most people here are more working on, I would say, haptic perception for robots, or touch sensing and processing to give robots a sense of touch. I also work, and where my work started, is more in haptic actuation, to give sensations to humans. And I see these two fields as really the duals of one another, like computer vision and computer graphics. You can learn a lot from working in both of them, or at least talking to or collaborating with researchers in whichever one you don't happen to be in. And yeah, I am a director at the Max Planck Institute for Intelligent Systems. I'm wearing my shirt today to show my pride. Germany has universities, like other places in the world, but also has research institutes. There are some other countries that also invest in this way, and Max Planck is like the German institute. There are more than 80 Max Planck institutes, and they're on all different kinds of science, and they're geographically spread around near universities that have synergies. And yeah, we have funding. It's mostly taxpayer funded, so I'm very lucky we're publicly funded. We have a good level of funding and infrastructure, and I lead a team. In German, they call it an Abteilung, a department called Haptic Intelligence, trying to reflect that we work with haptic sensing and haptic processing, haptic sensing. So yeah, I'm working at I was saying, kind of two quests professionally. I'm trying to give robots excellent haptic perception, which feeds into their motor capabilities, and giving human users excellent haptic feedback. And like I already mentioned, I think there's a lot of synergy between these two sides, and today I've chosen examples to tell you about that are in both of these domains, because I think throughout. Okay. And yeah, we'll see some examples. So I organized my talk into 3 sections. Touch sensing and actuation for tool-mediated interactions, then fingertip, and then whole body. I'm planning a break kind of after the very first little activity in the fingertip section, and the last one is shorter than the others, so hopefully we will stay on time. So we'll begin with tool-mediated interactions. And for this, I brought a demo. This is my former PhD student, now postdoc, Yijie Gong. She's originally from China, and she built this with a helper of hers, Hashita. I call it a portable aero touch. I'll tell more about the research that went into this. And I have it here on the desk, and I'm going to hand it around, but first I'm just going to explain it so you know how it works. I want everyone, hopefully everyone will have a chance to feel it. So we have a high bandwidth accelerometer. This is just like a demo board. It's an analog devices, 3-axis high bandwidth accelerometer. It's going to batteries that are just providing the voltage for the accelerometer, and then we're using like a wireless microphone transmitter receiver. So this is the same thing that they might use to mic speakers when they're recording on a show or something. And we can just buy this really cheaply, and it's very reliable. And then this is the receiver. It gets that acceleration signal, so these two pieces can be physically separated. And then this is an audio amplifier in a 3D printed case, so we can turn it on and off and split the input that comes from one sensor to 2 actuators. This is a LiPo battery. It's all going to be in this box when it comes to you, so you don't have to worry about it. And there's a switch here that will turn it on and off, and then it goes 2 outputs. So 2 people can feel at once, so maybe one person has the sensor and can feel their own output, and another person can just be feeling the output. And these are voice coil actuators. They're a lot like speakers. Inside is a stack of magnets inside a coil, and it's just being driven with an audio amplifier. So we're not transforming the signal at all. We're just measuring the vibration and transmitting it wirelessly to your fingertips. Okay? Makes sense? When it comes by, I recommend you tap and drag the accelerometer on different surfaces. There are actually some nice little, maybe I should actually turn it on. There are some nice little, let's see. Yep, it's working, so I'm just going to close up the box. There are some nice little grooves on the side of the accelerometer that are nice to hit things with. If it goes unstable, just unplug and replug in the accelerometer. I hope you don't have to do that very often. It's good now. So you tap and drag the accelerometer on different surfaces and hold the actuator, and it stops working. Carefully, this is the accelerometer, that green board. You can just unplug it and replug it. Do not rotate it by 180 degrees or you will burn out the accelerometer. And tell me if it doesn't, we'll fix it. Do you all have any questions? There's a box. There's some here. There's an actuator. There's an actuator. And then, do you feel anything?
Yeah.
Okay, and you get the sensor. And you keep the 2 boxes and just hand it around. We'll go through the whole audience. And let me know if it doesn't work, but you can play with it for a little while. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, hit, especially hard things are good. Hit against the boxes, or like the corner of the box. On the edge of the accelerometer, there's like some grooves, so that's like a nice texture to drag across. If you touch soft things like your skin, you won't feel very much. And if you don't feel anything, unplug and replug in the accelerometer. Are there any questions about this demo? Yes,
How does
Roberto?
the optic rendering work?
There's no rendering. It's just a signal to signal. It's a microphone and an accelerometer, but a haptic one. So it's just transmitting a physical signal, like an AC waveform. The voltage of the accelerometer has a non-zero mean, but the microphone input has a DC blocking. So it just takes the AC part, and this head doesn't get the very low frequencies. Because it's a wireless microphone, they don't expect frequencies below about 50 hertz. So you don't feel the really low frequencies, you only feel about 50 to 1,000 hertz. You can also listen to it. This is similar to some of the things that Gregory was showing us earlier about listening to how vibration travels through your body. And I'll have this here all day. The tapping, there's only one axis of sensation right now, I'm sorry for that, and it's along the axis of the cable. There is some vibration in all directions, but you will feel the most if you tap in the direction of the cable, or if you excite vibrations in that direction. Do we have any other questions or comments? I mean, also other people here know things about this. Yes, Ellen?
So I've never heard of haptic actuators before. So that's a silly question. What is moving inside?
Inside, there's a magnet. I'll just draw a little picture so you know. You can think of it like there's a magnet with like a north and a south. And you know, if you took a magnet and you put it on metal, it would be attracted to the metal, or if you flip it around, it's attracted. But then if we put a coil around this, like a wire in a circle, if we send the current one way, we make a north, and it makes this go that way. And then if I change this, I pull the current this way, and I make south, then it pulls it this way. So it's shaking the magnet, and the magnet is like kind of on a little spring, like a little suspension. So you can think about it, two masses that can shake back and forth. If you've ever seen a big speaker with like the center element that's moving, it's doing the same thing, but that's tuned for much higher frequencies and to move the air, to send pressure waves to your ears. This is trying to shake the case that your fingers are holding. Yeah? And definitely feel textures. I think like the transients, because we don't have super low frequencies in this transmission, the drag across kind of rough surfaces and show each other things you find that are nice. Okay, now I'm going to tell you research that led to this demo. And yeah, so I grew up in Los Angeles, California, Southern California. I'm the daughter of a surgeon. My dad, Stephen, is still practicing. He learned laparoscopic surgery in the 1980s when it was like minimally invasive surgery. Sean showed us some of this stuff yesterday. But I was sure I didn't want to be a clinician. I didn't want to get called in the middle of the night to the hospital and have to tell people that they have cancer and they're going to die. But it was always I cared a lot about healthcare, so you'll see I've worked quite a bit on health applications. And my mother is a now retired research psychologist, so like a human scientist, but she got her Ph.D. in the 70s when it was only 10% women. She learned to program in Fortran and like behavioral sciences. So I was basically, that's like my upbringing. And I played volleyball, like I already told you, and so I went to Stanford University, which is actually where my parents had both studied and met even, so I was brainwashed from a very young age to want to go to Stanford. And luckily it was a good university, and I played volleyball there, and we won 2 national championships. Not because of me, more because of Carrie Walsh. And I studied engineering, so mechanical engineering, and I loved it. I also did a lot of product design. I worked as a teaching assistant in a machine shop, helping people learn how to design and manufacture things, and I loved it so much I decided I wanted to do a Ph.D. And so I stayed. So it was bachelor's, master's, and then I started my Ph.D. in 2002. And I worked with Kuchenbecker. And he is a wonderful, brilliant man. If you ever have a chance to get to know him, he now teaches at Caltech. He's German originally, had studied at MIT with Jean-Jacques Satie, nonlinear dynamics. He invented wave variables, which are for time-delayed teleoperation. Then he was one of the first employees at Intuitive Surgical. And he worked there in the 90s, and we were designing and building this first robotic surgical system that's now very famous. It's used all over the world. And It gives the surgeon excellent visibility and dexterity. So there's a camera, these long, thin instruments, a camera, and instruments reach inside the patient. They insufflate the belly. Then you can see very well in 3D because it's a stereo camera. You have all degrees of freedom. Laparoscopic instruments don't normally have a wrist, and these instruments have a wrist. It makes it very intuitive. The company is very not well named. But there's no haptic feedback. And they have worked really, really hard. Only now, only in 2024, and only in the US and only in some procedures. They worked for years and years and years. And what Günther had told me is it's just technically very difficult, and I'll tell more about why, to do it well and stably. Neither the FDA nor the surgeon nor the patient likes it when a robot goes unstable when it's operating on a patient, and so they prioritize safety. Also, everything has to be sterilized and cleaned between patients to avoid disease transmission. And it ended up with all those constraints that they just do no haptic feedback. So just you're operating, you're seeing, and so you have to learn to use your eyes to correct for the missing touch. And it's done every day, and once people learn how to do that, they do it very well. There are thousands and thousands of operations. Günther started at Stanford in 2002 after this first robot was commercially available, and I was his first student. I started working with him, and he taught me a lot. I think I said he's now a lecturer at Caltech. In the interim, he also worked at Little Garage and Disney Research. Another quick experiment. This one's really quick. From what do I learn more? Which one provides more information? I have some material here like this table. I'm just going to press against it, or I can tap against it. What do you think? Tapping, yeah. Because you excite all these dynamics of tapping. And there's a really nice paper, Lamont 2000, that came out right before I started my Ph.D. And he did all these experiments that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that people can perceive much more about material properties when they're allowed to dynamically interact with them than just quasi-static pressing. And again, this feeds into what we know about mechanoreceptors because we have these exquisitely sensitive and biomechanical accelerometers that can tell us if I tap on this, or this, or this, you can hear, you can also feel the frequencies that are excited by these collisions, and you can feel a lot from those things. And so that idea led into some of my doctoral work. I'm telling you very old stories because I think it's good to know they're things that have influenced me a lot. When I first started working, we were doing both haptic virtual reality and teleoperation. This is like an example. This is a 6-degree freedom sensing, only 3-degree freedom force feedback, being able to touch a virtual environment. This is actually homework in a class I later taught. And the way you would program these environments, you give proportional feedback. So if the user moves, let's say we make a virtual table, or it's an organ or something, and when they're in free space, we apply no forces, and then they're pushing down into the table, we measure the penetration distance, and we provide a force proportionally out, like a Hooke's law force. And you can't make that stiffness very stiff, because you can't measure very finely, and you're only measuring about 1,000 times a second, so there's a little time delay, and you put that gain high, that stiffness, this virtual stiffness, it goes unstable. And it goes fuzzy. So you have to use only soft stiffnesses, like squishy things. Mark Kukowski, who's also on my thesis committee, and I worked with some, he called it Nerf world. Nerf is like spongy, foamy, soft. Everything in virtual reality feels soft and squishy, if you render things this way. And that's fine if you're doing like organ simulation, but it's not nice if you want to make like textures and hard materials or assembly of automotive parts or something. And so an idea we had, and we worked on this as a paper I published in TBCG, like right near the end of my PhD, what we call event-based haptics. So we add, and there was prior work by Alison Okumura and others on adding a little transient when you first make contact to speak to those mechanoreceptors, to tell your skin what you're touching. I'm not going to be able to give you 10 newtons or the stiffnesses like 1,000 newtons per meter or 1 newton per mil, or I can only do a couple, like a newton so per millimeter or two, but I can give you the right transient, give you the right high frequency information. And this idea works really, really well. We call it event-based haptics. And we would like record tapping transients on a certain material. The transient, you can see these are little accelerations from an accelerometer, like it's going around. If you tap at higher and higher speeds, you get like a larger and larger, we make like a little library of tapping transients that are indexed by the tapping speed. And then I did a lot of like dynamics modeling of the device and figure out what's the current that I need to pass through the motor to make about that vibration that comes out. Because actuators always shape what you feel. Like I'll feel a lot of what this device, how this device likes to resonate, and I want to make you feel as if you're touching that surface. So here's a demo. You're hearing the acceleration from this accelerometer on the hand. So this is a real interaction. On this side is virtual wood with this transient. And we can output this transient, even though we can only do like a small closed loop stiffness. And on the left, it's just the proportional, you basically feel nothing. You feel no transient. I showed this demo at World Haptics in 2005. The first, Vincent Hayward came over and he said, "Don't tell me anything. I believe you." That was my first interaction with Vincent Hayward. Okay, and then we had people tap and they didn't know what they were tapping, and higher is better. It didn't feel quite like real wood, but like real wood on top of foam. We get this acceleration matching these transients. Big surfaces feel much better compared to like foam, which is all you feel if you do it proportionally. Okay, sorry for the sound, that was a little much. The last paper I wrote as a PhD student was the most important. It was like a side project where we took that idea that I was just showing you and we put it in teleoperation. So I had the same robot that you were holding to move around, and I just added a second robot that would follow the motion. And I found this paper by Katherine on how was Mark Kuchenbecker's first PhD student. Mark Kuchenbecker is at Stanford, Rob Howe is still at Harvard. And they had done this 2-degree freedom, 2-fingered robot for manipulation with a force sensor and an accelerometer, and actually they used an inverted speaker. So there was more sensing involved and like this dedicated vibration actuator. We said, hey, could we take that same idea, just use the accelerometer in real time and transmit it to the user's hand in real time, just using the motors of the device. So we do the internal loop, is sending position commands back and forth to do the position tracking, and then we add this extra channel of high-frequency vibrations, high-frequency accelerations. And again, you're going to be listening to the sound. So now this is just a normal position teleoperation. So it's like a virtual spring. And we're hearing the acceleration at the hand. Now we add the high-frequency acceleration matching just in real time. We're measuring the vibration. We're outputting a filtered version, and you feel a lot, just like you do. Is the demo still working? Where is the demo? It's still working? Okay. Do you still feel something? Yes? Does it work? Or is it stop working? You have to tell me if it stops working.
I can feel something.
You feel something? Okay, good.
I can feel it.
You feel some vibrations. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, and then you can see that if we only do the position feedback, you basically get no high-frequency accelerations, even when the remote robot is doing all this interesting stuff. But if you add in this extra channel by putting a sensor very close to contact, and then doing something with the actuation here to try to bring that signal all the way to the fingertips, then you feel a much better approximation of what the remote robot is doing. And I think this is a good thing to do. This was April 2006. It's a long time ago, 19 years ago. But I still really like this project. Oops, sorry. Here, you want a picture? I'll tell you a secret. Does anyone know who this guy is in the left picture? It's my husband. Here's another PhD student in the lab, Jonathan Feeney. He now also works in my institute. And at the time, he was just like another PhD student, and he was posing for this picture because he was also on this project. And yeah, actually, we got married in July 2006. We just had our 19th wedding anniversary. All right. So I finished my PhD at Stanford in 2006, got married, and I'd already been on the faculty job market. I interviewed at a bunch of different places, and I was lucky to do a short postdoc with Alison Okamura at Johns Hopkins. She had just gotten tenure, and she's now at Stanford. She basically now has the professorship that my advisor had because he didn't get tenure. Because he wasn't good at writing grant proposals or going to faculty meetings, but he was wonderful good in person. Faculty jobs are not for everybody. But I learned a lot with Alison. I worked with her for 1 year. And then I started a faculty job, which I'd already accepted and deferred, at the University of Pennsylvania and in Philadelphia. And that's where the GRASP lab is. It's an interdisciplinary robotics lab. I loved my time there. I was there for almost 10 years. Jonathan was there too. He was a teaching professor. And I worked with a bunch of wonderful people across the top are like my PhD students and postdocs, lots of master students, bachelor students, faculty that I collaborated with and learned a lot from. And I'll just tell you a few highlighted projects from that time as well. I'm going to basically give like a keynote talk that I'd given at a surgical conference 2 years ago. And in medicine, you always disclose when you have a stake in something. So I co-invented the technology I'm going to present. I never made any money off of it. I co-founded a company called Veritouch Medical. It failed, so I'm a failed entrepreneur. Most entrepreneurs are failed entrepreneurs. I'm better academic than I am entrepreneur. But we were trying to license the IP. It still hasn't been licensed. I can tell you more if you're interested. But I did get some grant funding from Intuitive Surgical to have like an academic research grant program, but it wasn't to support the work I'm going to show you. So I arrived at Penn and I still had in my mind, like, how can I give haptic feedback to a surgeon when they're operating? It should be feasible. But how can we do it? What's the way? And I just published this paper. And I think it's good to step back at the time when people were thinking about haptic feedback. And still, if you talk to a surgeon and say, hey, do you need haptic feedback? They're almost always going to be thinking of something more kinesthetic. But I think so I would define tactile more as cutaneous, signals that are originating in our skin from our mechanoreceptors. And kinesthetic, and we could feel, we've always been hearing this, you could feel love, contact, location, pressure, stretch, slip, vibration, temperature, hair follicle motion, pain. And that's the other half of it is kinesthetic, more about your movement through space, proprioception. And I think because we had been designing and building robots, and we know how robots get like joint angle sensors, force torque sensor, people were always thinking force sensing and force feedback. But in the context of surgical telerobotics, giving force feedback is technically extremely difficult because you have this long, thin instrument that's reaching inside the patient. That has to be sterilized. It has to be, they can't cost that much. They already cost a lot. And there's this giant robot arm moving it around, and everything in a medical device has to be redundant. You can't have only one sensor. There always have to be two, and they have to be constantly checking one another. And beyond that, even if you could measure, and now Intuitive has a force feedback system that they spent $1 bajillion on. I don't even know how much money and time they spent to make it work. Even if you can measure a reasonable estimate of the force at the contact, when you play it for the surgeon, it's very likely it will go unstable. And I need to explain it. So if the tool, let's say, is coming down and touching something, and it measures a force, and then let's say, okay, we're supposed to give, at the next time step, we're going to give the surgeon a force up, because they just hit something over in the patient. And then that force makes the surgeon's hand move up a little bit. So then their hand goes up. And then the robot gets, oh, I'm supposed to go up. And then you get this cycle, you get this contact instability because there's a little bit of time delay. And when you have 7 degrees of freedom, like 2 times 7 degrees of freedom, all different directions, and you have no idea what's going to be there, which tools. There's like a catalog of 100 instruments, and there's thousands of surgeons who are going to sit at the console. Every patient is different. It's impossible to prove, it's almost impossible to prove it will never go unstable in some weird joint angle or with some weird contact, and it can be violent and dangerous. And so that's why Intuitive had made the decision, no force feedback, no haptic feedback, no instability, and we're grateful for that. And surgeons can still learn. But when I was sitting and thinking about this, and had a great PhD student, Will, I'll show him in a moment, I think it's technically easier, it's not easy, but easier to add some tactile feedback. But you need to think about what kind of signal. Maybe temperature in surgery is not so interesting. Everything is a body temperature. But from the work I've done before, and thinking about tool-mediated interactions, vibrations are really important when you're using them. Many people are thinking those are the surgeon's hands, but I don't think those are the surgeon's hands. I think those are an instrument that they're holding in their hands, and so they feel through the instruments. And vibrations are really important. This is my second PhD student, Will McMahon, now works at Berkshire Grey in Boston. And we made this system called Veritouch. It's a set of components that we could just take into an operating room. Well, I forgot to say this was funded by NSF Career Board back in the day. So we could just take these components into any operating room and attach them parasitically onto a Da Vinci surgical robot or other modern models of robot to add an extra channel of haptic feedback. And I was actually in the audience at a conference, MNVR, Medicine Meets Virtual Reality, where I realized that a demo that Will had done on the desktop with Omnis, that we could do this, that we could build components and put them on a robot in our operating room. And so we did that. We collaborated with David Lee, who was an absolutely brilliant robotic surgeon, who was very patient, let us sit and watch him doing surgeries. He came to our lab and tested demos. I really recommend working closely with clinicians. And we made this set of components where we have a high bandwidth accelerometer. We put it near where the instrument, because they're changing instruments throughout, and there's a sterile drape, like this bag that goes over the robot. So we made just this like sensor. It's like a microphone that's just riding on the robot arms. And then we add actuators, very similar, much bigger to the ones I'm passing around now. That their job is just to repeat, the right hand repeats what the right sensor feels, the left hand repeats what the left sensor feels. We gave the surgeon the gain controls to make it louder and softer. In the early days, we also played with sounds, which I like, because then everyone else in the operating room can also hear. An interesting side question, this relates to Roberto's question. Our hands can feel vibrations in all three directions, and we can easily measure vibrations in 3D. And actually, I don't know who it was, but there was a reviewer on an early grant proposal that I wrote, where I was proposing to have 3 perpendicular actuators. And they're like, you probably don't need that. Just one is enough. You can't feel the direction of vibration anyway. I was like, indeed, you're right. You can't feel which wave something is shaking. You just feel that it's shaking. And so we do measure vibrations in 3D. That you can feel which direction, and it's much easier to actuate in only 1D. And then you can think, I call this the 3-2-1 problem, taking a 3D vibration signal or 3D oscillation and turning it to 1D. What's like the optimal way? We've published many papers on this, and you can just think about it for a moment. I'll tell you, this was another flash of insight, because in the beginning we were only using one axis of the accelerometer, and I realized it had like tactile blind spots. Like there were things you could do with the robot that you wouldn't feel very well. Actually similar to the demo I'm passing around, because right now this is just one axis to one axis, unfortunately. And so yeah, I'll tell you, I can talk more about that if you're interested. So this is just a MEMS, a 3-axis MEMS accelerometer. It's also an analog device. There's some amplification and simple filtering. It's super cheap. But here on this board, we sum the axes together, X and Y and Z. You can get destructive and constructive interference, but it's not too bad, and at least then you feel something if something happens in all the directions. It's like $10, €10, super cheap. We put them there on the sensor. It's really important to not interfere with the robot. It works for no matter what instrument. We didn't want to add something to the instruments themselves. They don't have to be sterilized. We got permission later just to leave them on one of the robots in the hospital for months to do a lot of recordings, even in human surgeries, because they're so unobtrusive. They're just there listening to what the surgical instruments are feeling. On the actuator, we used to design and build these by hand. It's like a magnet and a coil with like one axis. This used to cost like $300. Now these are $60, the one I hand around. Now that one's probably not big enough to shake the whole handle of a Da Vinci because it has a lot of mass, but just one a little bit bigger, I'll show you one later, is plenty. And now this is David Lee, our surgeon, trying an early demo. And later we worked on optimizing where the actuators feed, and we got really good transmission, but basically it works in many locations. And that magnet, basically when something is hitting the tool, it's just immediately transmitting. The accelerometer is there just later we did some verification. So it's important that it delivers these realistic vibrations, capturing the signal over time, and it doesn't interfere with the robot. So when you put these pieces together, this is Jamie Gordon, one of the co-inventors. He's sitting at the console, moving his hands across the room. The instruments are following him, and every time there's some sort of collision or transient, even though the contacts are happening down here, the vibrations travel all the way up, and our sensors pick them up really, really well. And so it's a way to like remotely instrument these tools. And then it works like this. So this is a height transfer. This is a common practice task that surgeons do, and we're plotting on the left and the right. This is from the Transactions on Haptics paper that Will is the first author of, where you can see the vibrations, so you can get a sense. This person looks almost drunk. This is kind of almost like chaotic. But they were having trouble judging depth. Depth is really hard for people, and they they make kind of exaggerated motions, and they're kind of recalibrating their own motor commands to movement output and the vibrations. When they can feel them, they immediately know the consequences of their actions. So then that's David Lee. This was his fellow Alexei at the time. This is Carmen Barth, who was a postdoc with me. She now works at Apple. I'm going to show a surgery video. If you're uncomfortable looking at bloody things, down. This is a pig. So we were doing the animal experiment, and the surgeon is suturing. They transected, they cut through the urethra, which is where urine leaves your body, and this is a model for prostatectomy. So this is like the hardest part of a prostatectomy, where they're sewing the urethra back after they've taken the prostate out. And you can see every time the instruments are touching, there's like these beautiful little transients. We get really good signal to noise ratio. That was like the two tools hitting together, like underneath, you can't even see. So rigid contacts create this really beautiful. Now this is cutting, this is a vessel that they recently tied off, and they're cutting. Actually, you can even see, you can feel a little bit in the lung canal. So then I had an undergrad researcher, Austin, who's now a plastic surgeon, painstakingly watched this video frame by frame and mark every time, label it when the surgeon released the suture or grasped the suture, released the needle, hit the instruments, so that we could look at the statistics and the magnitude of the transients that were generated when the surgeons did kind of all these different actions. And when you do something more violently, you cause a bigger vibration. It was 82% of the actions cause vibrations, and some are happening like in blood. Sean talked about this a little bit, or out of the view. Surgeons often, when they're training a new surgeon, they yell at when the trainee takes their instruments out of view because they're blind, and then that's when injuries can happen. That if they kind of move the camera over here but leave one tool out of view, then they get tangled in the anatomy there. That's like how big injuries can happen, but they could still heal with this technology. So these are other students who worked with me. That's Will, that's Ted, who's now a doctor at Harvard. I'll say, I can't talk about everybody, but we took our robot to Baltimore and showed a demo for live for 3 days at a surgical conference, and had people come by and do peg transfer and suturing with the haptic and audio feedback, and then answer a simple question. So we had ethical approval for this. We had 94 participants. You can see mostly surgeons and people in training, and then including some intuitive reps. And the first question we asked is, hey, do you think it would be useful for you or other surgeons to have the option of using this feedback? Every single person said yes. That is a very strong evidence that it works really well. And we asked them, okay, which one, if you were operating, what would you want? Would you want the 62% said they wanted both the haptics and the audio, 35% said they only wanted the haptics, so they found the audio a little distracting. One person said only audio, and two people, these were both attending surgeons who were very experienced, said they wouldn't want it because they already know how to do this, but they want their trainees, the people they're teaching, to have it because they think it would help them. And actually, my experienced surgeons also said they wanted it and they could feel how it was changing how they use the instruments. That it lowers their cognitive load. Okay, now I have another quiz for you. Is this an experienced robotic surgeon, like my colleague David Lee? Who's now at Irvine, I should say. What do you think? Would you let this person take your prostate out if you have a prostate?
No.
I agree, Elle. Do not trust this person. Why?
Not precise.
They're not precise. They're kind of awkward. Watch this. Oh, no, they're still learning. Okay, now I'm going to show you the same video. This is a novice. This is someone like one of the first times they're sitting at the console. And they're being very awkward. I don't actually know if they have haptic feedback in this video, but we were recording. And I had this master's thesis student, Ted Gomez, who we were doing all this for haptic feedback. We were only thinking about in the moment. And he was like, Katherine, this relates to skill. This relates to surgical skill. We can measure how good someone is at operating from these signals, even though they learned without haptic feedback. And he was exactly right. So we followed this up for for years. This is Ted Gomez, and he's at Harvard. And we did studies like this where we brought people of different skill levels in to do different tasks, and we looked at different signals. We also did laparoscopic surgery. And yes, experienced robotic surgeons, they do these tasks not only faster, but with lower tool vibration. So they have learned, they've learned without haptic feedback. They've learned how to modulate their movements to avoid collisions, because collisions aren't efficient and they cause unpredictable things. They're very precise. Sometimes they're violent when they're tearing or breaking things, but they're very precise about when they want to cause big impacts. And usually they're super fast and super efficient. And novices, well, there's different kinds of novices. Some people are very slow and gentle, and they need to become more aggressive, but there are a lot of novices who are really violent. They need to learn to modulate their interactions. So we did lots and lots of research in that direction. Jeremy Brown, who was my second postdoc at Penn, is now just got tenure at Johns Hopkins. Did this with a nice study that he did where we recorded vibrations in the two instruments and the duration and the force that they are pushing on the board. Without even watching the videos, we could estimate the skill. Once we trained, we could estimate the skill of the surgeon doing the task, just as well as the surgeon watching the video, watching the pixels. And we're basically riding along the instruments and feeling how the surgeon is driving the robot for a particular task. So it's published in TBME. Okay, I'm going to show another surgical video. Oh yeah, Elle, question.
Okay, so by what percent would experienced surgeons have less vibrations? Did you share yesterday that it was 40% in 6 experiments?
That was about force reduction. That was, I think what Shan said is that when surgeons operate with force feedback, then they would, a wide level skill would reduce their forces. I don't have the exact numbers here. In this paper, we were doing more machine learning, so we were trying to estimate all of these different aspects: depth perception, bimanual dexterity, efficiency, force sensitivity, and robotic control. And these are interclass correlation coefficients similar to a new human rater. It's only a 5-point scale, though. In other work, I think some of the work that Ted showed, we had a surgical endoscopy paper, so on this constructability of robotic surgical skill. I think this paper has plots of the vibration magnitudes. It's always a distribution. There are some experts who are more violent or less violent. There's a range of novices, but the experts are able to be much faster and lower vibration in general, or they're going quicker and lower magnitude vibrations. Yes, Stephen.
Just thinking about robots, as in autonomous robots, and recently teleoperations become a very popular way to collect training data from behavioral modeling and so on. And so the question is, maybe the answer is yes, have you thought about using this in that application where you would improve the quality of the teleoperated data? This will work.
I haven't tested that. I just finished editing a long paper on a kinematic retargeting, a generic kinematic retargeting algorithm that we have for humanoids. And we had a short paper at World Haptics this year on adding haptic feedback to that. And we have a Now and a Baxter, and we're designing studies to test this. But so basically, yes, and I think especially for tasks that have contact, haptic vibrations are a very cheap way to give some good and useful. I should have said this before. I think force feedback was also not the right thing to look, or it's not the most important thing in surgery because most tissue is soft and you can see the deformation. In fact, we had published a paper a couple of years ago where we were estimating forces just from visually observed deformations. Also the tool, the instruments deform and the thing you're touching deforms. So surgeons learn to infer low frequency contact force from the deformations that they can see, or also tissue, the blood goes away, so there's all these visual signals that correlate with force. But these high frequency vibrations, especially if they're off camera or there's these rigid things or there's a collision you can't see, it's more complementary to vision. So it's more event based and telling you something happened. But in the trial we did with the pig, crazy things happen in operating rooms. And the arm of the robot was hitting the pig's head at some point, and the surgeon at the console, it was the trainee, he could feel it. He's like, I'm hitting something, what is happening? And because even though it was way outside the patient, the pig, and then they could readjust where the patient and the robot arms were. They're reconfiguring things in the OR. So it gives you this like broad haptic sensitivity. You know from context. You can figure out from context where it's happening. We played around a little bit with multiple accelerometers, but usually we just need one and it's sufficient because these robots are
I'd
pretty
just love to
stiff.
know, like, if it was used in the context of teleoperation for autonomous robot, whether the policies that are trained are actually better as a result. It goes right back to your first demo with the match, because they're going out to things like Aloha has one robot, I think it's from Stanford, and they're manipulating an object which is right here with this the inputs here, the arms there. But they have no sense of touch, right? So it's like a girl at the match.
I fully agree, but I haven't done that study, but I should write that down. Imitation learning. Okay, I saw another question.
Sort of related was it's really interesting the thing with the quality and the skills assessment, because that could be a reward signal for a robot as well.
Oh, for sure.
You know, are you a skillful robot? But you feel your vibrations and you should.
Yeah, I'll show a little bit more in that direction. Here, yeah. Eric, US. Running? No, hiking. Yeah. Sorry.
Is there any evidence for how the vibrations relate to like surgical outcomes?
We don't. We just published a paper, it's actually on the summary slide, on cognitive load, but it's more so Ted was a master's student during his MD, and then he had to do residency, and then he became an attending surgeon at Harvard, and so he collected so much data. He ran 5 studies during his master's thesis, and we're still analyzing the last one. And here, I'll just go through the study that we just published in Surgical Endoscopy on cognitive workload. This was a training study where surgeons practiced with the haptic feedback or without, and then they learned the next day they were in the operating room doing on human patients without the haptic feedback a gastric sleeve, or which is a stomach, it's like an obesity surgery. And we do have the clinical outcomes, but I think we didn't have enough patients. Like, we never analyzed it. I think we basically ran out of steam. But I also was never successfully able to license this technology, and for various reasons. I would hope that there would be a benefit. What we found was cognitive workload and like faster learning, which I think reduces the risk at the early career stage. We also had some anecdotal evidence in the Hamlin paper where when our expert surgeon sat down and was doing the same task, he himself, this is similar to Sean's result, would apply lower forces when he had the haptic feedback compared to without. So even though he could modulate very, very well, he could become even like superhuman and even better control his haptic feedback. I don't know if it's clinically relevant. At that level, it's probably not clinically relevant. I think it's more useful in the violent early learning. Yes?
So for these soft tissues, as you said, the vibrations are going to be strongest on contact and when you break contact, presumably. So in settings where, do you think that the framing of event-based haptics would be expanded in sort of like a teleop, like as Stephen said, like a teleoperation setting where you would be getting continuous vibrations through like a sliding interaction, or do you think you would end up with people being sort of frustrated with like continuous?
Oh no, people like this kind of vibrations. It's important you let them turn it down if the signals are too big. Like you don't want your headphones on too loud, but you just like want to turn it down. There's so much I could say. Like I could talk for hours about only these things. I brought this plot up again so you can see like there are still a lot of transients, like breaking a needle or pulling a knot or collisions between the tools. Cutting is very violent, like, or not very violent, but there's a texture and they can feel more about the tissue that they're touching. Just like opening or closing the robot, you get a little bit of what's called ego vibrations, like the inner workings of the robot causes some vibrations. Tissue contact on its own is tiny, or tissue slipping or grasping tissue. But you can mostly see, it's more these more violent, bigger events or ongoing, like cut, or drag, but I think there's benefit to that. I think I should keep going because we have an activity we want to do. Go. Okay, I'll just summarize. That was the summary of what we used to call VeroTouch, and then I had a PhD student, EJ, she's the one who made this demo, and I became part of this cluster of excellence in Stuttgart that's on, it's like integrative computational design for construction and architecture, so like digitizing construction. And we had colleagues who were using these giant, this is a mini crane, they're making modular structures, they make these wooden cassettes that are like 90 kilograms, and normally they're just manually teleoperated on construction site. We want to automate this. And so the first project that we did was taking this technology that we developed for surgery and then making it modular so it could go on any robot, including those construction robots, or our surgical robot, and using audio technology because we needed something that could just go out on construction sites and be super simple and robust. And so that's where we got this idea of using audio things instead of making custom circuits. We can just piggyback on audio technology, and we did more studies. This was frontiers in robotics and AI of like what sensors and actuators should be and how to do the signal conditioning. And then we actually did studies on construction sites where people were feeling as the robot was either autonomously moving to construct or being teleoperated, and especially with like the fine assembly at the end, it was very, very positively perceived. People could really feel more like they're part of the robot and that know what the robot's doing. They can feel the vibration. So that was the demo. Did it get to the end? Did everyone try it? Great. And did we turn it off, or should we turn it off?
I turned it off.
Thank you.
Because it was making noise.
Yeah. If there's okay. You turned off the amplifier, the orange box, or what did you turn off? Perfect. Super. Okay. This was like an arc of my work. This like VeroTouch haptic feedback vibrations. In parallel, I had another arc that I just wanted to very in one slide summarize. This is the last thing in tool-mediated optics. My first PhD student, Joe Romano, and my third PhD student, Heather, who just got tenure at USC, worked on this. Joe is now at Berkshire Grey. And it was the main topic of my career award, MSF career award. So we called it haptography. I'd done that haptic tapping work as a PhD student, and we worked on texture. So that was a tool, we called it the haptic camera, that had, go forward, that has motion tracking and a force torque sensor and accelerometers in it. And then we record data like for texture, that's a piece of canvas. We look at the speed and the normal force and the vibration that's generated. We combine the axes. Then we were first doing things on this Wacom tablet, so we add a actuator similar to the actuator we felt on the, there's sound. That's touching the reel. So you can do touching the real material. Heather collected a database of 100 different materials. It's called the Pen Haptic Texture Toolkit. And then she also did friction measurements and tapping transients. And so then we have several papers in this direction where we're synthesizing. And basically the idea is we fit a little like colored noise model for particular combinations of speed and normal force. And speed, like how fast you move the tool over the surface is the most important. Normal force is it's not as important, but we do both. And then in real time, as you're moving along like this virtual surface, I'll play that again. No, that movie. This one. Then we take white noise and we color it to match the spectrum that you should be feeling if you were driving on a real surface. We did lots of experiments where we had people touch surfaces and they didn't know what was real or virtual, and we could show we could really capture this is real rated roughness corresponds very well, correlates really well with virtual roughness. This is hardness from tapping, and this is slipperiness, so friction. So we could really capture through a tool, the physical properties of the materials and render them quite accurately. But only because it's tool-based, not direct touch. Yeah. So yeah, that was the first set of things I wanted to tell you about, tool-mediated haptic interactions. What questions or comments do you have? Yes. Paolo, Italy, skiing.
Yes, that's me. Have you ever thought about any other tactile cues for haptic feedback aside from vibration?
Of course. In the rest of my talk, I'll talk about some things. We did forces here too, right? So friction and the normal force, but it was mostly vibrations. I think during the tool-mediated interactions, when I started my career, what was enormously missing was vibrations, these transients. And now there are more, people use them more, but they're still, I think, missing.
How
Yes.
did you record the surfaces for the
Yeah, so it was with this tool that was at the upper left-hand corner. This is a handheld instrument with a 6-axis, a Nano 17 with different tooltips, and then a magnetic motion tracking system and two 2-axis accelerometers mounted orthogonally. And then we calculate from the 3D movement the tool position, and then we can get speed over time and the normal force and the vibration. So that's the data sets that we would get. We ran a demo at World Haptics 2013, I think, where we let people record 10 seconds of data and then field their own model immediately, like a minute later, and we won Best Demo. Vincent Hayward, again, a Vincent Hayward story, came by and had his credit card. He's like, I want to record what my name feels like. And you could really feel like the letters on a credit card felt pretty nice. So it was a pretty computationally efficient modeling approach, just from like 10 seconds of data. Just you need to go slower and faster. You get a little bit of a range. Paolo first.
Is it possible to classify texture based just on vibrations recordings?
Yeah. The last part of Joe's thesis, we put that tool in the hand of the PR2 and had it drag across lots of textures, and we looked at adding different signals, and so we've also done, I'll show some more work later with fingertips, but we did tool-mediated texture classification for robots as well, and doing machine learning on those signals. Yeah, I mean, you can hear the difference, so the patterns, they're there.
Is there a resolution threshold, like below that the pen doesn't feel any differences?
I think certainly, definitely. I think we heard a lot from Roland on the first day about the materials, and there's some level, either whether it's the limitation of the sensor or the mechanics. What you feel depends not only on the surface, but also the recording tool. Like we've also shown that smaller tooltips excite more interesting signals than a bigger radius. It doesn't get into the cracks of the surfaces, but if it's too narrow, it gets stuck, and that's frustrating. So there's kind of some small, but not too small tooltip that seems more optimal for exciting and being able to feel. But it also surely depends on the other materials. I think we should move forward. You all have been sitting here for a long time now. Eric, last question.
No, it's okay.
No, please.
Is it hard to prevent like a quick orientation change from creating a high-frequency signal, or does that less voltages do that for you?
I didn't quite get your question. What orientation change?
Like a fast orientation change that creates a high-frequency signal in acceleration.
Interesting. Yeah, we always high-pass filter. We get rid of the signals like below 20 hertz, which are mostly coming from human movement or like the robot movement. In the Da Vinci, we actually high-pass filter at 80 hertz because there's a lot of robot vibrations in that like 40 to 50 hertz. And actually, we were finding it was going unstable. We lower if we go from 20 hertz, feel more of that ego vibrations of the robot, and it can occasionally go unstable, especially if like we rotate the instruments in some weird ways, and we get like sustained vibrations, which we don't want. So having this what's called frequency separation, where you're only feeding back like the higher frequencies, this actually keeps it stable all the time, and it feels nicer. You still feel a little bit of the robot ego vibrations, so you do feel something when they're moving their hands. Actually, I think that's part of the benefit of the feedback. Is when surgeons in training or lay people sit down with this robot, it's very powerful, but they don't have a sense. It's like for free. You move for free, but you're moving this massive robot, and there's a patient laying right there. And so I think the ego vibrations, the like feeling of the robots on movement, it like gives you an impression of the power of it. So I think it's connected to like embodiment, that you better understand the strength and this big thing you're moving, because there's some feedback. Okay, so that was the first chunk, and that was the longest chunk. Tool mediated. I'm just going to do one activity, and then we're going to have a break. This is called an activity with unknown objects, and I'm going to explain it to you, and then we're going to go out in the courtyard and do it together, and then you're going to have your break, and then we'll come back. We'll agree on a time. Maybe 11 might work, but I think we still have some time for this activity. So the way this activity works, you're going to partner, so you're going to have a buddy, and I would appreciate it, everyone, including faculty, you should do this, but if you don't want to, it's okay. And we're going to do this activity in pairs. There are 2 roles, and you'll both play both roles. One person is going to be the feeler, and one person is going to be the presenter. And the feeler is going to close their eyes and put one hand out on a table. We have some tables outside, and you're going to put your hand, and you are not allowed to move your fingers. You just are a passive hand. And you have to close your eyes. And my mother told me that I should tell you, don't look. Because if you look, you're cheating yourself out of an experience. You may be tempted, you can look at the end, but keep your eyes closed. I don't have blindfolds or anything, but just keep your eyes closed, put your hand out, and your partner, the presenter, is going to come over to my box of objects and get an object. They're all safe, there's nothing dangerous. They get a small object, and then they're going to bring it over to you, and they're going to touch your hand with the object and try to show you what this thing is, okay? Your hand stays stationary. And you can guess, you're trying to figure out what this thing is that you're being presented, and when you either give up or you guess correctly, then you can move your hand. Okay, so first you're passive, and then you can actually move and self-manipulate, and then you can look. Okay? That's the order. I do need all the objects back. Many of them are special to me. I've been doing the same demo since 2007 when I started as a professor. These objects have history, so I do need them all back. And I want everyone to have at least 2 chances to be the feeler and 2 chances to be the presenter. And maybe you'll do better on the second time because you might learn what helps and doesn't. And while we're outside, I will also bring my matches, and you can, when you're bored, try to light a match with your eyes closed and see that it's actually not that difficult. Does anyone have any questions or comments about the activity? Okay, then we'll go out and have a break. So we'll go out there, we'll do this. Doing this activity in the courtyard, and some of you successfully lit a match without your eyes closed when you're out looking. Now I want to briefly hear some observations that you had from this activity with the objects when you were being presented the objects, I would say passively or actively. What did you notice?
When they do it passively, they concentrate more on the temperature, and when they do it actively, it's explore all the textures.
Okay, by passively you mean that they just like lay it there, then it's like static contact, so you're focusing on the temperature, and then they were also actively moving it around, you're feeling more about the texture. Someone also asked, are we allowed to like push it in? And sure. I saw many of you using the hand. I was surprised you weren't using fingertips more, because there are more mechanoreceptors here. Did you notice that?
Yeah. So Lewis was moving the objects from my palm to the fingertips, and it was amazing that how when it would come close to my fingertips, I would get way more information about the size, the texture, temperature, material.
With much more denser mechanoreceptors there. Yeah, more comments?
Yeah, it's also when passively we flip the object, it gives more information about it. Yes. So.
Yeah, so you were saying, like kind of dropping it or rotating it, that you get a little bit of the dynamics. Mm-hmm. But did it, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and I feel like for active manipulation, I just feel more. I feel like I'm doing 3D reconstruction in my mind.
Yes.
So I'm basically knowing more about the orientation of the object, so it makes a better reconstruction, I think.
I totally agree, yes.
And I also felt that when the object was rougher, it felt more easier to guess what it was than rubber. It was like smoother. I don't know why, but
Yeah, maybe the roughness was very salient and you could kind of recognize it. Yeah.
You cannot feel the weight when you are just standing.
It's not so easy to feel it statically. If you were allowed to like lift it up and down, like try to accelerate it back and forth, then you will feel the mass more than just the passively. Yeah, a lot of your mechanoreceptors wash away the static response, right? You know there's still something there, but you don't really feel how heavy it is. All right, other comments? Okay, then we'll keep going. Thank you for playing with my objects and bringing them back. These are just some comments I had, like when I first got to do an activity like this. I think, especially once you're allowed to move your hand, you believe you're feeling the object, but as some of our other presenters emphasize, you only feel how the object changes your body as you're moving relative to one another. And like, it's not, the object is not instrumented, it's my body. Like the sensors are in my skin, and I think, and I think it's very important. One of the goals, I wanted you to feel like the benefit of actuation, that when you get to choose your motion, you then know the movement that's causing the sensation. You have more of the context, and you can choose what kind of questions to ask the object based on what you're feeling, and you can get a more like a 3D picture or a representation. I think this active touch, being able to move and control the motions and know what they are, is really important. There's a cool old study, it's from Steve Shaw's lab at Johns Hopkins, where they had people touching textures, and they had 3 conditions. One where you just hold the tool and they drag the texture by you, one where you move your hand, and the third one where like a robot moves your hand, but you can still feel. And that one where you're passively moved, actually, it's more like the active touch, because you have the copy. It's a simple interaction, so you know how you're moving relative. So that then, when you're the one actively moving, or you can feel the motion that's causing the interaction, you tend to focus more on the object. And when the object is moved against you, however it is, that you tend to focus more on the sensations, and it doesn't really come together as much like an object. Yeah? Cool. Okay, now I'm going to tell you some more research that I've done. Of course, this is all like focused more on things I did while Joe was also doing the haptic texture work. He did an internship at Willow Garage, which made this PR2 robot. And we also had one of the first PR2s. We were in the beta program. You probably don't even know what this robot is. Personal Robot 2. It was a really big deal at the time. And it had haptic sensors. And it had a gripper. Luckily, some of the engineers who worked at Willow had heard me give a talk, an early career spotlight talk at RSS in 2009, when I was like raving around our early texture and stuff I just told you, and surgical stuff. They put an accelerometer in the PR2 hand, and then it had these really low resolution, crappy, slow update rate fingertip pressure sensors. But we were still trying to figure out, we were trying to take inspiration from Johansson and what he taught us about grabbing, picking up objects. At the time, people would just command the gripper to close, 100% motor effort, and in all the robot labs, every object was crushed and destroyed. We were trying to do more like fine touch, tactile sensation, looking at the start of contact and doing force control. So this is even a raw egg. This was like our big final demo. That in those days, vision was horrible. We had this like scanning laser thing. It was very, very coarse. That we could only roughly see where the object was on the table, and then like feel in that grid of like 3x5, and now feel how hard it is and figure out how hard to squeeze it and then lift it up. We could also feel slips from looking at like a disturbance of the tactile pressure sensors, and then we also could set the objects back down. We took impressions of setting down like hand, and this is like just a standard approach, like dead reckoning, or this is when the robot opens its fingers when it feels the vibration or slip in its fingers, and so you can be not as damaging, not as violent. And we also did experiments where we had a cup and we're pouring more objects in, and the robot was like automatically squeezing a bit harder, and they could feel things slipping. And then Joe also, this ended up being really transformational in my career, started doing a little bit of human-robot interaction, because this is the PR2. He programmed it to go through these trajectories called PR2 props, and when it either feels a little change in its pressure sensor or the accelerometer, and you can do these really interactive high fives and fist bumps, and we showed this demo to thousands of his children. This was like on stage when Willow Garage was like showing us like the most popular demo at the time, and it was really engaging to touch the robot and the robot feel and stop. It's very hard to detect these contacts visually, but you could do it easily rapidly. I had another PhD student, Rebecca Pierce-Kershid, who's now at Boston Dynamics, and along the way in her dissertation. She worked also on teleoperated grasping of this PR2, again trying to use these tactile sensors, but now looking a little bit more at the fingertips. She made this device, which I'm going to hand around. There's a little hand sign to remind me that I have something in the hands-on demo. I'm not going to, it's rickety, it has a lot of pieces, but basically the motor would go above your metacarpal phalangeal joint, the index finger, you would put your finger through this. And then there are voice coil motors that would move these platforms in and out against your fingers to making and breaking contact, and also do vibrations, and then the motor would do the grip force, and there's optical markers, so just be a little careful. It hasn't been used in a long time. I stole it out of the glass case in my department. And she did not just the device design, but again, some signal processing and like changing the gains and like masking the vibrations of this robot vibrates a lot when it's open and closed on its gripper, but we could get know if it's actually holding something or not, to do things that we did a big study where people, I think 30 people came to the lab and did this like pick up and move and set down and pick it back up and pick and play sonic force sensor. And I think we showed the grip force feedback helped a lot, and the vibrotactile feedback, similar to what I showed in surgery, made people a little bit better at setting down and like generally more careful. As we implemented it here, the making and breaking contact with the fingers was a bit violent and didn't actually help because it would like kind of fly into your fingers and kind of startle people. But it was still an impressive investigation, and it was really probably tested like systematically all 8 combinations of these 3 kinds of haptic feedback. Like every person did the task with all kinds and also gave feedback. It's I think a TOH paper. We built a lot of other haptic devices along the way. This was a PhD student of mine, Eric Young, who's now at Meta. This is a device he built called a puppeteer. It's published in TOH, and then there was a Kai paper also on it. It has 6 like bendable rods that can reposition this little platform. He did the optimization. Each of these like linear drive. It's a massive object. I didn't bring it. It's too dangerous, and it was really encumbering. It can like offset the weight. You did the first demonstration of like fingertip, 6-stop fingertip control, so that you could like program it so that like that platform would stay stationary in space, and you could like rotate your finger or slide and do friction and rotational friction. It was obviously a very complicated, delicate device, but it was something in fingertip haptic feedback. Standard actuation approaches are really cumbersome and heavy and rigid and awkward. I think actuation is a big limiting factor in wearable haptic devices. We're going to return now to surgery, and I had that certified collaborator, David Lee, and we worked on all this haptic vibration and skill assessment training. At one point I was watching him, he just removed a patient's prostate, and he brought the prostate over to me after he'd removed it. He gave me a glove and asked me to hear Katherine palpate the prostate that I just removed. He's like, I wanted to feel it while it was still in patient, because you feel how the cancer over here on the right-hand side, it grew since the last scan, and I really wish I'd known that. So I would have like cut more tissue away, because they're trying to cut away everything that might be cancer. And there's nerves that control urination and sexual function right around the prostate, so they're trying to spare as much healthy tissue as possible. It's a very difficult surgery. And so that got us thinking about palpation. Could a surgeon palpate during the surgery? And I had a great visiting PhD student, Claudio Capirotti from the Medical Practices Lab. The Medical is now independent in CNRS in Rennes in France. And this is where he did when he was a PhD student, visiting PhD student with me. We took a BioTac, that's a biomimetic tactile sensor, mounted it to the end of the Da Vinci tool, and then controlled put a little platform device. Domenico's lab had made a lot of these different platform devices with 3 wires, and we were transmitting making and breaking contact with the skin and the broadband with vibrations in real time. We had a whole series of papers, pure haptics, transactions on haptics, and then TBME, this is the final one. And I have this a version. This is not actually the final device. This is an earlier version. It's got 3 servos, and your finger would go in on from the side, and you can like gently rotate the. So compared to like that device I showed you that Eric made, this is much smaller, and you can get a sense. You have like a 3-dot platform, so you can pass that one around. And a really interesting thing, my favorite part of this project, why I loved this project, was Claudio and I sat there and said, okay, we have this robot, this little fingertip device with 3 actuators, and we have that sensor that gives us these 19 impedances, sense vibration, this DC pressure. How to map what that sensor is feeling to what the finger should feel to what the actuator should do in real time. And I'm really proud of the idea we came to. Yeah, this is like, we have these readings from the sensor, what should we do with the actuators? We put the fingertip sensor in the device to be able to capture the space of tactile sensations that this device can cause. So we could basically go to every one of these in joint space, I think it's like however many joint angles, 39,304 combinations of the joint angles, and then at each one of those quasi-statically we could measure what the finger was feeling, where it was pressing. And then we also, in a subset of those, we did the vibrotactile response, so we knew how well the finger could feel vibrations. I think it has to be touching the finger, so we can kind of do what I showed you in the surgical domain. And then this is, before we added the vibrations, you can just see as Claudio is pushing the BioTac against this edge, this device is now in real time, at 50 times a second, recalculating what joint angles would best approximate what that sensor is feeling. And it worked really well. It was just in data driven, it's just like nearest neighbor in tactile space. And that was what enabled us to make this palpation system on the Da Vinci. So the task that we presented users with was there's a rigid rod embedded in a silicone, and they have to tell, it's a 1D search task. They have to tell us what's the angle. And so this person is probing, and you can watch the angle at their fingertips leaving and making breaking contact, and when they come really close with the stick, now it kicks up in the front. And it's really pushing hard in the front. So you feel like an approximation. When you go back past it, and it's pushing at the back. So you can feel kind of like the tangent plane of the stiffness. And then you can also feel the vibrations. And the results that we showed, we tested in 3 conditions. This contact and pressure feedback significantly improves their performance at the task and also their subjective experience. So they estimate the angle of the rod. This is with no haptic feedback. These are with the contact and vibration, much lower errors, much higher rating. They also push, they didn't push as hard, so it was like softer pushing of the patient. And interestingly, you can also see the green and red look very similar, although it looks like there's a little trend for better perception with the vibration. Remember how the movement you make changes what you feel. And a subset of our participants, I think this was 16 participants, 7 of them adopted a different strategy. Instead of pressing like you saw in the video, they were dragging their finger across the sample. And for them, the vibration was how they were feeling. So they 2 main different exploration strategies. And for the people who dragged, they did much better because they'd chosen, and then the vibration was the cue. It would drag across in different places. It's a nice little story. But along the way, it also got me motivated to improve tactile sensing, because although that sensor did a lot, it also had some big limitations. In parallel, I had another project that was funded by DARPA. It was a collaboration with Trevor Darrell, who's a computer vision person at Berkeley, and these 3 were the co-first authors of this work, where we equipped our PR2 with 2 biotachs to give it much better tactile sensation. Then we had it touch, I think it was 60 different objects, and the people also touched those objects and described them with words. So we were doing language way before language became so popular. And we trained little support vector machines to be able to discriminate, like, okay, is this object nice? Is it fuzzy? Is it hard? Is it thick? Is it rough? And it actually worked pretty well. I published a few papers on that. But these sensors were a big limitation. They're multimodal, which I really like. They're giving you something about shapes, internal pressure, and vibration. But it is hard to interpret those 19 electrode impedances. It's a very compact form factor, but it's a very small, sensitive area. But it was super annoying. You have to run all the wires down the robot arm. And they break. They were expensive. Like now, most recently, they would cost $17,000 each. At the time, for $10,000, they would break. Like all kinds, and you have to send them back. And it was difficult to integrate them. And they were really not robust. They were also not that stable. They would change over time. So I'm really glad that we had them. But I also thought, and I'm glad there are now so many more tactile sensors available.
How would they break?
How would they break? Usually, they would just lose connection. This little wire. The wire that goes into the ribbon cable, that you can see we stabilize this ribbon cable here, hard soft connections, like this ribbon cable where it goes into the sensor, that's where it would break, and then you would get no signal. That was the main failure mode, and you get no data. Okay. So then I had been at Penn and I was super happy there. But then I got the call to move to Germany. I was able to get this nice director position. So in January 2018, I moved to Germany. And I built this new team where I work and live now. I brought some people with me at the Max Planck Institute for Intelligent Systems. And very early, I met Georg Martius, who was a group leader in the tubing inside of our institute. He does a lot of machine learning and developmental robotics. And one of his first PhD students, Huang Ho-sun, who is now a professor at Peking University. We started chatting about what we could do in tactile sensing. And we came up with the idea to do a camera-based tactile sensor, but a bit different from the ones we already saw, where they use soft, deformable material with a very thin outer layer. We made our sensor hollow, full of air, and just with a 1-layer over-molded silicone skin on a metal skeleton. So this is the first version, called Insight, was published in Nature Machine Intelligence in 2022. super sensitive. We do a calibration. I'll show this video. This is a 3D printer that presses, but now this is showing inference. So Quadbo is touching. This is like what the camera sees inside. There are LEDs that illuminate the inside of the textured shell. And then we're doing end-to-end learning. So we are taking pixels and turning them to 3-axis force vectors. You can see this is a reconstruction, so we can do multi-contact. So no matter where you touch, we're sensitive on all sides. It's a really big surface area. And we can do a pretty good job from this controlled training with a force torque sensor. So here's Swanko showing you can touch in different locations and get shear and normal force. Very, very sensitive, very good accuracy. If you rotate it relative to gravity, you can feel which way it's oriented relative to gravity because the rate is like there's enough of a signal. That was shocking. But it's really big. Right, so this is Juanbo and Georg and me. We're really proud that we made this thing, but it's like as big as your thumb. It's enormous. We always wanted it to be small. So we hired a new Ph.D. student, Iris Andrusov, and she actually joined this summer school last year. And this was her first paper published in Advanced Intelligent Systems on MinSight, a miniature version of InSight. And that sounds easy, but there are actually many little things we have to optimize in the material, the fabrication, the design, and the camera, and everything to get it really compact. But it worked really well. I have a copy not functioning. I'm sorry, I didn't bring the USB converter, but at least you can touch. So it's over-molded silicone on a metal skeleton. You can kind of feel there's like a preferential direction. It's kind of meant to grasp in a certain direction. Again, the camera and an LED ring, a collimator that like aims the light on the inside surface. And again, taking image, we actually did studies of like the resolution. We actually downsampled the resolution because you don't need every pixel because we have a pretty thick skin, so we can't like see the texture of the object we're touching. We're looking more for force vectors, but the goal is the same. It's actually programmed a palpation demo, which I won't show, but then a tactile circling where the robot can follow her finger. Because we designed it for this robot, which is called the tri-finger robot. This is just one arm of the tri-finger where we do acute manipulation or other manipulation tasks. We wanted it to have a preferential grasping direction. So similar, your bone inside your distal flange is also like a bit slanted, so it's trying to like make a platform to push. Whether it's optimal, she tested a few different ones. This is this tactile servoing where the robot, we actually have a force torque sensor in the handle that she's holding, and we're showing the actual force magnitude versus the force that the sensor is estimating based only on this image of what it sees inside, and it's like very good tracking, very good at knowing contact, no contact. And going the vector in the direction it's like moving to maintain this contact. It moves out of the way or it follows you to try to stay in touch with you. And we just had a paper accepted to humanoids because this sensor, this MinSight camera-based sensor, also has limitations. We were only taking images at 30 or 60 frames per second. So we can't feel all this vibrations, all the textures, and you know that's something that's very important to me. So it has created MinSound, which is the audio version of MinSight. So it has the same structure, and eventually we'll make one that's both. But for this first paper, we have a robot hand that's actually an easy hand. It's an open source hand, but it's also just accepted to humanoid. But she put MinSight on one finger and MinSound on the other finger. And we worked on a task of in-hand fabric recognition. A lot of texture research has been done where mounting the fabric on like a hard backing, like the textures I was showing you before. And we wanted something that was more like in-hand. You should be able to hear. This is the sound of nothing. But now, so there was a set of 20 fabrics. This is tool, it's fabric number 1. So you can hear what the microphone and the thumb sensor is feeling, and it's quite rich. So it's like feeling, we wanted it to be more similar to like what a person would feel as they're like shopping for clothes. And you get really nice different signals. Importantly, we put an external microphone. So if people are talking or there's ambient noise around, that can kind of fake out or confuse the sensor. So, and we tested that. So there's the camera base inside, which is really getting like normal force and shear. We use that to do the closing, and it can kind of estimate the friction. And then we have the internal audio, that's the texture, the external audio is kind of, can hear a little bit, but it's mostly canceling out. And then proprioception, so the knowledge of the motion. We didn't try that many, this is just the only motion that you see. It's a bit randomized, but it's just rubbing back and forth. And then she trained pipeline, a machine learning pipeline that figures out classification, which of the, I found this on the web. No, search for that. Which of the materials, we held some materials out. We also did stretchiness, roughness, and some properties. With the audio, the internal audio works much, much better than the camera optical flow, the external audio per perception, and with the external microphone, it's just a little bit better because it can better cancel out like ambient noise. So it actually works pretty well. Yeah?
Is it possible to localize the contact point using audio?
No. But I would say we don't need that. That we have the camera, we intend to make, it is already mostly made a version that's mid-side and mid-sound because the microphone can be super small, just like next to the camera. And so that we can have both of these channels, and we would use mid-side the camera to know where the contact is happening, and mid-sound to know the higher frequencies, the textures, like the making breaking contact. Yeah?
Right. So if I see correctly, you get like better performance with just audio?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's overfitting on the camera.
It's overfitting.
So as far as we can tell, the image data is much higher dimensional. We're downsampling it to the resolution that we need. We did an ablation study in that first where we checked how well we could do the test, like downsampling, we found like where the force estimation and contact localization stops dropping out. And it's actually the same number of pixels as like it's approximately, if you divided the surface, it's about the same number of taxels-ish. So we're downsampling that, but yeah, the audio, I think it's like 8 minutes of interaction with each of these materials over several days, and the testing is a separate day, but the camera still overfits when you only do the optical. We were really surprised. She tested it over in different ways, but the audio doesn't overfit. It's much lower dimensional, and then like it's really characteristic sounds. The image, there's not much to see. This you should not compare to this like gel side or any of the thin or like digit or digit 360. Those are seeing the texture. This is just seeing the contact forces. Okay. So it can't see the surface. It's because this is a little bit more human inspired. Right? Mm-hmm. This is more like how you would feel textures. You feel friction. You feel where it's stretching. There's no temperature yet here. Okay. I think we should keep going. Apparently that's everything I want to say about fingertip tactile sensing. Does anyone have any other questions or comments? Yes, Paolo.
For texture classification, have you ever thought about trying to find a quantity that like you can regress instead of classify to get the texture of a material?
You can regress roughness and softness, you can regress properties, but I think they're such high dimensional because I was talking to someone about this during the break, like it's contact mechanics, like dragging, it depends, what you feel depends both on the tool or the finger and the material, and it's an enormous variety. Like there's so much variety that regression, I think it was on the first day, Roland was showing the dimensions of human tactile perception from the Okamoto paper, so that is what I would look at, like there's coarse and fine roughness, heat transfer, softness, and like something like slipperiness. But you can have points at the same place in that 5-dimensional, 4-dimensional space that feel radically different, right? So in this paper, this one we did both. We did regression or classification of roughness, thickness, and stretchiness, just to show we like looked in a low-dimensional space and things that are similar are, so like the classifier is learning a decent representation, but you can have 2 points right on top of one another that feel very different. Because it's a low-dimensional representation.
In the palpation you mentioned there's a user study to find the road inside the
yeah.
But did you actually try it with surgeons?
No, we showed the demo. This sensor is not suitable for taking into an operating room. I've had surgeons try it, but we would need a better tactile sensor. And the hardware is, this was like a little bit of a blue sky thing. It was not like meant for clinical translation, but more like just to see if it would be possible. But no, we didn't get test site surgeons. That was like pretty close before I moved. Like Claudio was finishing his PhD, I think he ended in 2014, and I was moving to Germany, and I was leaving Penn where I had all these wonderful clinical collaborators, and then I've continued in different directions. But I think it would be worthwhile, but it's like a high. I'm not sure it's worth it. I'm not sure it's worth it. There's many other methods of imaging, so like ultrasound, like in vivo ultrasound or preoperative imaging. We're actually doing a lot now with multi-perspective, like adding a second camera in teleoperation, or we did a lot of augmented reality, like 3D reconstruction or other things in surgery. But I didn't keep working on the palpation thing. Also, often when my students become faculty, I try to give them some space to keep working if they want to continue in those domains. So I think Claudio's done some things in instruction.
Yeah, I find the results of the audio fingertip very impressive. Why do you think we've not seen more audio-based fingertips in kind of trick transition? Because I think that cheaper.
Oh, I mean, I think in the end you should have both. I think every camera-based tactile sensor, Digit 360 has a vibration audio sensor, but I think vision, you get this distribution of contact, and that's often what people think about, and it's super cheap and easy to add audio. Actually, this paper was rejected from RSS because they were like, oh, that's old news, microphone, yeah, whatever, we know that. And we were a little annoyed. Like, oh, really? Like, there actually aren't that many camera-based tactile sensors with microphones in them, but okay, fine. So we just revised, we added more experiments instead of dehumanize, so it's fine. I think we're all limited by what tools we know and what things we try, and there's so many powerful tools in computer vision. It's true. I love the camera. I didn't even explain why. So it's really just so economical. It's like simultaneously capturing all this distributed data, and it's so robust. Like the camera's not going to get damaged. It was transformational. It really changed what we can do. It's so annoying. I'll show more in this next section about other kinds of tactile sensors with wires and like distributed sensors. It's just so annoying. It's such a nightmare. Like if you make that your PhD, and you saw really beautiful things that Stephen was showing too. And I think when you're looking for clever tricks. But building complex integrated systems is maybe can take a lot of time and effort, and it might not always be aligned with like publication timelines and finishing a PhD. So that's why it's nice that Meta made the Digit 360 for us. Yes, Roberto?
I have a question. So regarding the performance that you get only from vision.
Yeah.
So when then in their paper they seem to be getting pretty good accuracy.
Yeah, totally different sensor.
Yeah, no, but and also Jan recently did a paper, Jan Peters did a paper where they get basically 100% accuracy in static images. So they argue that you don't even need active sort of exploration.
It's a different, if that's your goal, you could just point a camera at the fabric. You don't even need to touch the fabric. Why touch the fabric? Just take a picture of the fabric. I agree that this is not a camera-based tactile sensor like the Digit 360. It's not a transparent, deformable layer with a very thin surface. For MinSight and Insight, we focused on robustness and easy fabrication, like cheap cost of components. There are no layers that can be laminate. It's super robust. It runs like we do reinforcement learning with this tri-finger robot that's not published yet, like manipulating cube for like days, right? And it doesn't get damaged, and so it lasts. And so we were more thinking about like these start and end of contact, forces, and now vibrations. But it's not meant for, it wasn't designed to like statically press against materials and recognize them. But that's great. Maybe robots should have all. Maybe that's like a phobia, like high density tactile sensing. I like that you can dynamically interact with things instead of having to like press into them. But it's more like human inspired and less like superhuman. I think it's good to see different approaches.
But do you think that this is because of the way that the illumination is happening?
No, it's like the skin of Digit is like, the skin of MinSight is like several millimeters thick. There is no way you can read text or see fibers through it. It's thick skin so that it will last a long time. I think we could optimize it to become thinner, but it's fully opaque. several millimeters thick. Never, I mean, if we made a new version that was transparent with a thin surface on the outside and we collaborated with, maybe we could go more in that direction. It was just not the goal of the project. All right, I have one more module I wanted to tell you about. It's the shortest. And we move from fingertip interactions to more whole body, some limited things. And I think I have 4 projects I wanted to show you. So I already showed you Insight and Insight, and I wanted to tell you a little more about other tactile sensing work my lab has done over the last years. This electrical resistance tomography, I think Gregory briefly showed some of this work. That's Hyo-Sam Lee, who was a postdoc with me and then a group leader in Stuttgart. And now he's an assistant professor at TU Eindhoven in the Netherlands, and he came from KAI's, where he worked with Jung Kim on lots of different tactile sensing work. And he made this whole family of fabric-based, like resistance tactile sensors. So there's like distributed electrodes, and like we make these layered materials. And then when you press from the outside, here's the demo, that's what you should really look at. So when you push in different places on this fabric-based like laminate, the resistance is locally reduced, and we can do multi-contact and force estimation. And what's happening is super, super fast. There are all these little electrodes, and it's taking pairwise resistance measurements, scanning all the possible pairs and doing a reconstruction, similar to like a CAT scan or so it's like a tomography of reconstruction. It's solving this inverse problem. And it works pretty well. We did, I mean, you can see we published a lot of papers. I'll show the video one more time. I mean, we did things where we're changing the scanning pattern at different times to be more optimal and like get more like high resolution in a certain area. Or we did one where we did a simulation, so we could augment the real data with like simulation because it's relatively simple to simulate what should happen. And then Hyo-Sam is continuing wrapping it around robots and stuff. But this is like only, I think we could get like 100 hertz scanning like rates, but it's nice because it's very thin and soft and inexpensive. You need this electronics that are scanning pretty fast, but it's fewer wires than you would need with individual taxons. So that was that big body of work. And then another project I'm going to tell you more about. This was the doctoral thesis work of Rachel Bevel-Burns, who just started as an assistant professor at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville in USA, and she's also a Max Planck Partner Group leader in my team for the next 5, or in my institute for the next 5 years. And it was, again, many, many papers, the haptic empathetic robot animal, and many collaborators, including Hyo-Sam and Hasti, who was another postdoc of mine who's now a professor at Arizona State in the USA. So her first paper was this thing. We interviewed autism therapists and asked them what they would want for a robot that could feel touch, to try to help children with autism learn to interact through touch better. And they said things like they only need to know which area of the robot is being touched, and like whether it's a positive or a negative touch. They don't need like super high resolution, and they wanted it to be soft and nice to touch and easily washable. And then I'll show the second paper, which was published in Frontiers in Robotics and AI, on how we can put tactile sensors on a Nell robot. It's a very simple tactile sensing approach, but we more try to make it like a do-it-yourself method. So we could fabricate tactile sensors. It's similar to what I showed you with the Hyo-Sam sensors. So there's a top electrode, then this foam, and then a bottom electrode. On top of an insulator, we make these sandwiches and we form them. So it's just a resistor and voltage divider. And when you squish it, the resistance goes down. And we make one for each body part of the robot, and we fabricate them. I'll show you a video in a moment, like to fit on the body parts of the robot. And like an open source library of parts for the now. This is like a little video, so you just need heat-activated tape and some snaps, some scissors and hooks and some gripper tape and some neoprene and then some conductive foam and some conductive fabric. And then if you choose the robot body part, you can measure it out. This is Rob Faulkner doing he's the 4th author. He's an engineer in our institute. So it's like making a little pattern. You can also draw it in CAD, and then you can either cut it with scissors or you can laser cut all the layers. It's important that as you go progressively out, you make the layers bigger and bigger and bigger to account for the curvature. You should not, a lot of people, we in the beginning made flat sensors and then you bend them and that changes their starting resistance. So it's really important to fabricate them curved to fit on the robot's body part, so that you're not using up most of your dynamic range with the bending of the sensors around the robot. So then now we fabricate these, and we solder some wires to them, and we do 16 sensors over the body of the now. And yeah, each of them is just a variable resistor. So it's a really simple sensing approach, but you can do a lot with it. So we started with the 4 sensors on the arm, and then we collected the data set. This is like a trial and a study where we had people perform different actions on different parts of the robot's arm. They were told to do gentle poking on the hand, or energetic tickling on the shoulder. This is hitting, energetic hitting on the robot's hand. And here you can see these are the 4 signals from the shoulder to the elbow, and you can see like really nice tiny signals. There's some coupling between channels. Yes, we had these 15 participants. We collected this big data set that's also publicly shared. We labeled it and trained little classifiers on little windows. You could do very well which part of the robot is being touched. Gentle energetic things like 86 to 94% accuracy. We always include none, not like no touch. It's really important to know when nothing is happening. Figuring out the gesture, there's some confusion, but this is because people hit and tickle and poke robots in very different ways. There's an enormous variety of how people execute these gestures. People also, we had them rate the robot, and they didn't feel afraid of it, and they liked it. They liked it even more after they played with it for a while. And then the last paper from Rachel's dissertation, which is still under review, we're revising. We outfitted the now with 16 sensors across its whole body, same sensors. And Ben is co-first author. He was at this summer school last year. He's actually now married to Iris, the woman who did the mid-site. They just had their wedding on August 2nd. A very high-power couple in tactile sensing. He now works at Fraunhofer, but he did the learning for this project. So we now have 16 sensors across the robot's body. We re-engineered it so we can do a much faster sampling rate, and we again had people touch and poke the robot in all these different ways, all over the robot's body. And this is like a final demo. So Rachel is going to come in here and poke the robot's head. Wow, you can't really see this, but these are P's. It's feeling poking on the, and it's a capital P when it's energetic poking, and a lowercase p when it's gentle poking. We can't even read it, but she's tickling the arm, and you can tell these are the 16 channels and streaming across little windows what it's feeling. Many interesting things happen. The robot is just sitting still, right? It's like you with your hand out being touched. There's crosstalk, right? Like the robot's hand is sitting on its leg, and you're touching its arm, and it's stimulating its leg, or the whole robot. The clothes are stretching, like the outfit, the koala costume that couples the neighboring sensors. That's both a benefit and a drawback. The robot is smiling and not smiling, but you're classifying. You can pre-program how these are positive or negative touches. We showed this in the open day. You would think the children would pet the robot. They hit the robot. They might punch the robot. It's really fun to make the robot unhappy. So then we tell them, okay, calm the robot down. Pet the robot, and they're nice to it. But so many interesting things happen. You can even imagine if the robot was like reacting. This is something that's very underappreciated. It will stimulate its own tactile sensors, right? The same way that when you move your arms, your skin is stretching. When this robot moves its body, its tactile sensors are changing all the time. And the robot needs to be anticipating what it will feel as it's moving so that it can distinguish what sensations are coming from its own movement and what's coming from the outside world. This self-other, exteroception. It's your own movement. There's not that many like whole body sensing things in robotics yet. Or if there are like these little discrete things that are quite rigid, which wouldn't work for our application. Okay, so that was Hera, the How to Get a Better Robot Animal. Hopefully this thing will get accepted and get published soon. And I think just 2 more projects. But these are some tactile sensing things I wanted to show you and just point out some commonalities, like my philosophy when I'm making tactile sensors. We're often trying to use soft, cheap, robust materials. Softness, I think, inherently cushions contact and makes it easier to control contact, nicer for people. We don't want to spend a lot of money. We want to have fewer wires. 0 would be great. Wireless would be wonderful. I generally really like fast sampling rates. I would personally rather have faster sampling rates with a broader receptive field And so I can figure out some patterns over time and know more of what's happening rather than trying to do that spatially. I think it's like cheaper from an engineering standpoint to get a lot of measurements over time from a bigger area than unless you are using something like a camera or other optical methods that give you like a broad area. And then, yeah, I also fully believe that we should be transforming sensor signals to robot perception with machine learning. But training data is costly, and these models, they need to run really fast, right? The inference has to happen locally, so you can't have a super fancy thing. It needs to happen as fast as possible, like little windows of data, and then the robot is trying to understand what's happening. And also the different kinds of errors have different consequences. Like feeling touch when no touch happens is like my robot is hallucinating and insane, versus it didn't feel me touch its elbow. Maybe that's a less socially awkward errors. Maybe false positives, I think, are worse than false negatives, although false negatives are also bad. Okay, I'm going to show you another project now. This is, I think, the second to last, maybe the last thing, no, second to last thing I'm going to show you. This is Hyderabad. This is Alexis Black. When I was moving from Penn to Marsden, she was my last master's thesis student at Penn. She's now an assistant professor at Case Western, doing social robotics. And this was her master's thesis where we took our PR2, we put it in a purple fuzzy suit with we wanted to have a robot give hugs. And it got a lot of media attention. It's soft, it's warm, we had the robot. We had people hug a hard robot, a soft cold robot, a soft warm robot. Obviously hugging a soft warm robot is much fun. Program the girl to hold on too long or let go too early. People were very offended at both of those. It should be just right. We had a very primitive tactile sensor on the back. We still had to like push to let go. But this was enough to yeah, that's Alexis. This is like a funny video that they made. Yeah. So then Alexis moved to Germany and became my first Ph.D. student, and she was co-advised with Waldemar Hilliges and Roger Gasser at BTH. And her goal was to actually make a real hugging robot, Hyderbot 2.0, and she built it from components with 2 Canova Jacko arms and padded and a computer and a space screen and head. And it's soft and warm, and it's kind of like a cuddly grandma. And the most important part is the chamber. We've made it out of vinyl, so like a beach toy. She like cut the pattern and heat sealed it around the edges, and put a microphone and a pressure sensor. Only in the beginning there was one in both the front and the back chambers, and then you only need the one on the back. So super simple sensors, just a pressure sensor and a microphone. And then we had first an HRI paper, that was the first platform, and then this is from the Transactions on Human Robot Interaction paper. It's 50 pages long, it's massive. And we brought a bunch of people in. In the first study, people would like pat or squeeze the robot, and they were offended when it didn't react. So the second big chunk was recognizing what we call these intra-hug gestures. So when you're in the embrace with the robot and you like pat it on the back, you should acknowledge that you respond. And so these are microphone data and the pressure data during embraces with people doing different actions. There are just 4 of the kinds of actions. We trained again little machine learning. So Hasti, who did the first machine learning on the earlier version of Hera, she also did basically the same methods here. Again, little windows of data over time to infer, is nothing happening? Is the user holding still? Are they patting me? Are they rubbing me? Are they squeezing me? We can recognize very well what's going on, and it's important making and breaking contact. This is a the robot invites you for a hug. This is a participant in the study in the THRI paper. Guy goes over, we see how tall you are, the robot adjusts higher or lower, and wraps its arm. It's basically grasping you, closing until the torque. Now he's going to pat, and then the robot is like squeezing him. It's hard to see, the robot responds with different intra-hug gestures. Again, he pats, he squeezes, and we let go. And this is just an example of what the data look like. These are like the robot joint, the joint angles. They're not very back drivable, these arms, torque sensors at every joint. And these are the joint torques. So we use those as like safety release at the end, but we couldn't get gestures out of them. But here, the microphone, it does hear itself talking, and you feel when the robot user's hands first touch, and then here this is pounding and patting the robot a lot. And then you can also see it really nicely in the pressure. You need the both to be able to distinguish like rubbing. Rubbing has a high microphone signal, but not much of a pressure sensor. We also did a lot of like how the robot should respond. We had expected that if these are preferences, pink is better. These are the 4 different user actions. We had kind of expected that if I was holding still, the robot should hold still. If I pat, the robot should pat. That's not actually what people say at all. People really like being squeezed, no matter what they did. People really don't like if they do something like rub, pat, or squeeze and the robot does nothing. That is a rude robot. It's a stupid robot. More than half the people think it's a stupid, bad robot. And they actually like some variety, so that was what we programmed. And the robot should respond. Here, actually, false positives aren't so bad because people like it. They think the robot cares for them. The robot proactively squeezes you or hugs you. This is another participant in the study. Yeah, so these are like ratings. People thought it was friendly before and after the study, and then they significantly more intelligent, significantly more enjoyable, significantly more natural after they've had a chance to interact with the robot. They do lots of different gestures. They stay in the hug 20 to 25 seconds and report it being very calming. And I think the key to making this so interactive and fun was these intra-hug gestures, the sensing and the reactions. And we took our robot on the road to Eurohaptics 2022 in Hamburg, and we hugged more than 100 people over 3 days. And a lot of people gave us permission to show their photographs. So you know who that is? So Medical Pratikizzo. He enjoyed hugging the robot too. And that's Alexis running the robot. And yeah, we won Best Demo. So we hugged like 100 people, and it's like a giant haptic experience. And yeah, we ran one more study that isn't published yet, but it was more about stressing people out and how well the robot versus having a human can calm them down. But I can't talk about it because it's not published. Okay, that was the third. Now we have one more project. They asked me to talk about actuation, wearable actuation, and I tried to plant the seeds in the haptic fingertip devices. These are massive. I'm proud of the work that we did, right? This is awful. No one wants to wear this, right? It's uncomfortable. It hurts. You don't even notice. Making this adjust. Every hand in this room is different. Making this adjust so it fits every hand, so everything is sliding and get bigger and smaller. Fitting things on the human body is really hard, especially with rigid components and heavy actuators that are based on magnets and coils, especially if you're trying to do forces, or I have never worked on exoskeletons. I hate gloves. They seem really, really difficult. And it was mostly, I think, because of actuators. We've been limited by these standard electromagnetic actuators are a huge limiting factor. So the problem here, we were thinking about, we want to be able to get haptic feedback, now not on the fingertips where you have very dense mechanoreceptors, but on hairy skin, so wearables. If I have garments, like a huge percentage of my body is available to get some sensations and not so precious like my fingertips. I think many of you probably have wearables that have some haptic signals, but they're only vibrations, right? So like a monolithic vibration, it's usually not even broadband, it's usually narrow, so it's usually a voice coil actuator. It's very good, very efficient. You care about battery life, so you want tends to only vibrate and do different patterns over time. But I want broad bandwidth vibrations like you felt in the demo that I passed around. And beyond that, I already told you, I think making and breaking contact is really important. If I come over here and I touch you, that's very salient. Yeah? And our wearable devices, they can't do that, and they should be able to. So, Christoph Kaplinger is another director in my institute, and we were lucky to be able to hire him. He was a professor at Colorado Boulder. This is a paper his team published in Science on new artificial muscles. And that wasn't really the only reason why we hired him. He's really a great scientist. We started collaborating. We have a PhD student together, Natalia Sanchez-Mayo. The paper was published in Advanced Science at the end of last year on adapting this Hazel actuator technology to wearable haptic devices. So A hazel is basically like a baggie of oil where you put electrodes on the outside of the bag and you make a capacitor. So it's like a deformable, fluid-filled capacitor. It's hydraulically amplified. Then when you apply a high voltage, they are attracted together and that pushes the oil to another place. And that can be used to make muscles that like shorten. Or Natalia figured out, she re-engineered to make like a line of these packets of pouches and folds them up to get a stack because we wanted high displacement and high bandwidth. And so we call these cutaneous electrohydraulic actuators. It's in a package about the size of an Apple Watch, and it's 3D printed with some soft components and hard components in these pouches. And when we turn the voltage on, we get like almost 3 millimeters of displacement. And we lift the actuator off the skin so that it can cross that gap and press into your skin, and it can also have high bandwidth. So again, making breaking contact with the skin and broad bandwidth vibration transients. And I have a cute device that I can pass around so you can just feel it. There's a thin silicone layer on top of this folded. You can kind of see the electrodes. They're made of silver ink. Folded up. Yeah, and if you watch, actually Julia was on this paper. Hi Julia, you weren't there. Julia's fourth author of this paper. So now we're watching one of these devices actuate. This is the voltage changing from 0 to 6 kilovolts. So it's 6,000 volts. And we can do very high frequencies, and it's really salient because you feel it touch your skin and leave. We're also now mounting them just against the skin. It's small, it's silent, it's thermally cool, it's very energy efficient because there's very little current, it's also safe. And then we can do this very expressive haptic actuation. We did a lot of characterization of the forces and the bandwidth. It's a beautiful flat frequency response because it's fluid, it's incompressible liquid, so we can transmit to your skin so well. I'm sorry I don't have a live demo. We're working on miniaturizing the electronics. We ran a study where people came in and felt one of these 6 signals, and they did it 97.9% accuracy, like really, really easy to tell which is which. And then we also had them rate a larger set of signals. Here you see this is a heartbeat signal. A lot of people find the vibrations from wearables to be rather annoying, and they feel kind of unnatural, and you even get a little acclimatized. So we ask people the emotional valence. This is like a positive versus pleasant versus unpleasant, and this is arousal, like exciting versus calming. And almost every signal was on the positive, pleasant, and it could range from calming to exciting. This one negative signal is a constant vibration, which is very much like what our current devices do. So I was really proud of the range of sensations that we could create, especially how pleasant they are. And we envision a lot of applications. Look at Julia. Me, this is Zach and Philip and Natalia and Christoph weren't there today. The photos are showing how the device comes together, different applications and wearables, mixed reality. We haven't yet connected it to a biotac or like some tactile sensor for, obviously I think this would be really great for giving feedback in teleoperation. We're also now starting to have a new PhD student co-advised with Michael Sedemar, who's a VR, AR professor. We're using it in wrist wearables. We have a master's thesis student who's made a bracelet with multiple actuators around so we can do directions. We're working on miniaturizing the electronics and doing other things in soft haptic hazels. But I thought, this was published in Advanced Science. I think we don't need to make and break contact, pressing, and frequencies. And they have many benefits, so I'm investing a lot of energy in this direction. But we need to work on integrating the electronics. And something I didn't talk about here so much, but how actuators are mounted to the body really affects what the user feels. And a lot of times we attach things with straps, but then if you tighten it, you'll get a different sensation. And so we're doing a lot now with trying to standardize how things are attached to try to make it more uniform. There's often a really high variability in haptic feedback studies, and I think this is part of it, and individual variability, another part of it. Those are some thoughts. That was the last thing I wanted to tell you. It's 11:59. The bells are about to go off. I would be happy to take some questions. And actually, I have like 2 more slides after this, but here. Any questions about this last and this whole body, tactile sensing, human-robot interaction, wearable actuation? Eric?
High voltage is high voltage.
6,000 volts. but it's extremely low current because it's a capacitor. You should not be afraid of high voltage. You should be afraid of high current. Like, I don't know if you've ever had a haptic device, a motor get hot, these stay cool. I mean, we need to insulate them. If you touch them, it's like in the winter, if you develop static electricity and touch a doorknob, that's like the worst thing. My husband works on the electronics. He says the main negative symptom is swearing. When you zap yourself at 10,000 kilovolts, it will cause you to swear. But it won't hurt you unless you have like a pacemaker or an electronic device assisting your heart. There, it could be dangerous, so it said people shouldn't be around high voltage. But yeah, and there are some other like haptic actuation approaches that are kind of in this domain, but I think is of electrostatic, electroosmotic, dielectric elastomer actuators. In general, like higher voltage piezoelectric actuators, although those are ceramics, so they're really stiff, so it's hard to get big deformations. That's why these hydraulic ones can get more deformations. And it can get similar to the efficiency and the properties of biological muscle. Any other questions? Yes, Al?
How did you control the how do you what?
Yeah, so it's extremely simple. Yeah, so the robot sees how tall you are and then has a playout of like how high or low, and it opens its arms, and then when we have a depth camera, so we can see you're approaching, and we also have the sensors in the back, so we need to see that something has come towards us, and then there's a pressure threshold, like the pressure in the back is increased, and then it closes its arms at a very slow rate until torque thresholds are exceeded. So if you're bigger or smaller, you're off to the left or the right, it's basically just enclosing you. I wish the arms were back drivable. They're not very back drivable. Like you can overpower them, but they're pretty stiff. These are Canova jack arms, which are meant to be on wheelchairs for like assistive robots. We chose them because they're thin and silent. And then if you push back, and we also have a threshold on the torque, on the shoulder or the elbow torque, then it will release, or if you let go of the back, it will also let you go. So you have like a redundant let you go.
Is it like position control?
Yeah, so they're position controlled. Yes, it's position controlled. And then, but once we feel like, we know the torque needed to close the robot arms, and once the torque goes above a bit above that, then we stop that joint. And so we're like enclosing you, because we can tell we're like right on your skin. So it's using that torque threshold. Okay, I'm going to say thank you to the people who supported this work. So that was the three things. I told you my quests in the beginning. Giving robots excellent haptic perception, giving human users excellent haptic feedback. So hopefully now you see some synergies between those two. This is my current lab. You can see Katherine is here, and Julia is here. You've met them already, and I have various PhD students, many of whom are code 5s, and some postdocs, and some visitors, and master's thesis students and staff. I'm grateful for all that they did to make this work possible. This is my larger institute. We have like lots of group leaders, and since Christoph already told him, Michael and I also work together. We're in Stuttgart in Tübingen. So. And yeah, thank you to Roberto and the other organizers and everyone who funded our work and collaborated and reviewed our papers and mentored me and funded our work. That's it.